On a scorching July evening in 2006, the Ramirez family's white Chevy Suburban disappeared from the dusty outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. Security cameras at a roadside convenience store captured Maria and Victor Ramirez with their teenage daughter, laughing as they purchased cold drinks. Hours later, they were spotted at a small diner in Bisbee, where waitstaff remembered the family's animated discussion about their upcoming vacation. As darkness fell over the Sonoran Desert, the Suburban's taillights vanished along Highway 80. For the next 17 years, no one would see the Ramirez family again. Each piece of evidence, from faded tire tracks to overlooked witness statements, would gradually reveal a horrifying truth that had been buried beneath the desert sand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In July 2006, Tucson shimmered under the relentless Arizona summer heat. The temperature had climbed to 109 degrees by midday, creating heat waves that danced across the cracked asphalt and turned the distant mountains into wavering mirages. On the eastern edge of the city, where suburban developments gradually gave way to desert, the Ramirez family prepared for a weekend trip to visit relatives across the border in Sonora, Mexico. Victor Ramirez, 42, owned a successful landscaping business that had flourished in Tucson's growing neighborhoods. His weathered hands and sun-darkened skin spoke of years of outdoor work, but his warm smile never dimmed despite the exhaustion. His wife Maria, 40, taught Spanish at the local high school, beloved by students for her patience and occasional homemade tamales during cultural events. Their only child, Elena, 16, was a bright, sociable teenager who had just earned her driver's permit and dreamed of studying architecture. That morning, the family loaded their white 2004 Chevy Suburban with overnight bags, coolers filled with water and snacks, and a few gifts for their relatives. Victor carefully inspected the vehicle, checking tire pressure and fluid levels for the desert crossing. The Sonoran Desert in July was unforgiving, and he took no chances with his family's safety. "Vámonos," Victor called out, his voice carrying across their front yard as Elena helped her mother lock up the house. Neighbors waved as the gleaming white Suburban backed out of the driveway, its engine purring in the blistering heat. The time was just after 4 p.m., when most Tucson residents remained indoors with air conditioning blasting against the punishing sun. Security camera footage later recovered would show the Ramirez family stopping at a Shell station on the outskirts of Tucson at 4:32 p.m. The grainy video captured Victor filling the tank while Maria and Elena entered the convenience store. Elena's long dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she gestured animatedly as she spoke to her mother. They purchased cold drinks and a bag of chips, smiling at the cashier before returning to the Suburban. This mundane moment would later become a haunting timestamp, the last normal hour of their lives. The family continued southeast on Interstate 10, following the familiar route toward Bisbee. At 6:15 p.m., they pulled into the parking lot of the Copper Canyon Diner, a local establishment known for its home-style Mexican food. The sun was beginning its slow descent, bathing the desert in amber light, but the heat remained oppressive. Inside the diner, waitress Jenny Holbrook would later recall serving the family. "They seemed so happy," she would tell investigators. The daughter was talking about colleges, and the parents were discussing family they hadn't seen in a while. Just a normal, loving family having dinner before a trip. Jenny remembered Victor paying with cash around 7:30 p.m., leaving her a generous tip and thanking her warmly in both English and Spanish. Security footage from the diner's parking lot showed the Suburban pulling out at 7:42 p.m., turning south onto Highway 80, the road that would eventually lead to the Douglas border crossing. The family appeared to be making good time, hoping to reach their relatives' home before midnight. As twilight faded into darkness, the white Suburban continued south, its headlights cutting through the gathering night. A border patrol camera briefly captured the vehicle passing a checkpoint at 8:17 p.m. The officer on duty recalled nothing unusual, just another family heading to Mexico for the weekend. Then, like desert rain evaporating under the Arizona sun, the Ramirez family vanished. The first indication something was wrong came the following Monday, when Maria failed to appear for her summer school class. The principal, concerned about her uncharacteristic absence, called the Ramirez home and received no answer. By Tuesday morning, after Maria missed a second day without notification, school administrators contacted Victor's business partner, Miguel Santos. "I thought they were still in Mexico," Miguel told the principal, confusion evident in his voice. "They were supposed to be back Sunday night, but I figured they extended their stay. Let me try calling Victor's cell again." When repeated calls went to voicemail, Miguel drove to the Ramirez home. The house stood empty, mail overflowing in the box, newspapers yellowing on the front steps under the merciless sun. A neighbor's irrigation system had sprayed water onto their driveway, but no tire tracks indicated the Suburban's return. With growing unease, Miguel called the Tucson Police Department at 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday, July 18. "My business partner and his family went to Mexico for the weekend," he reported, his voice tight with worry. "They were supposed to be back Sunday night. No one has heard from them. This isn't like them at all." Officer David Mendez took the initial missing persons report, but the response was measured. "Adults go missing all the time, sir," he explained to Miguel. "Often they've just changed plans and forgotten to tell everyone. Since they were traveling to Mexico, communication might be spotty. Give it another day, then call us back if you still haven't heard from them." Miguel wasn't satisfied. He immediately called Maria's sister in Nogales, Sonora, who answered with confusion and rising panic. "They never arrived," Consuela Vasquez told him, her voice breaking. "We expected them Friday night. We've been calling and calling." Within hours, Miguel was back at the police station, this time with Consuela on the phone. Officer Mendez's demeanor shifted immediately. "So they never reached their destination," he confirmed, making notes rapidly. "That changes things significantly." By Wednesday morning, the Tucson Police Department had issued a missing persons alert for the Ramirez family. Their photographs appeared on local news broadcasts: Victor's kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, Maria's warm smile and professor-like glasses, Elena's youthful grin and graduation photo from her sophomore year of high school. The initial investigation moved rapidly. Border crossing records confirmed. As a workshop. In a metal toolbox, they found a set of keys for a Chevrolet vehicle and a woman's silver bracelet with the engraving Para Maria, con amor eterno. Maria's sister Consuela identified it immediately as a gift she had given Maria years earlier, one Maria wore every day. Sheriff Blackburn announced Hollister as the primary suspect in a press conference on July 27. "We are actively seeking Raymond Hollister for questioning in the disappearance of the Ramirez family," he stated firmly, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. "We consider him armed and dangerous. Anyone with information about his whereabouts should contact law enforcement immediately and should not approach him directly." The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. How could a family vanish so completely on a well-traveled highway? Where was the Suburban? And most pressingly, were Victor, Maria, and Elena still alive? Hollister remained elusive. His truck was discovered abandoned at a trailhead in the Huachuca Mountains 3 days after the press conference, but there was no sign of the man himself or the missing family. The vehicle yielded important evidence, however, traces of blood on the truck bedliner that DNA analysis would later confirm belonged to Victor Ramirez. As July gave way to August, the investigation seemed to stall. Despite one of the largest manhunts in Arizona history, Raymond Hollister had disappeared as completely as the Ramirez family. The case remained front-page news throughout the Southwest, with vigils held in Tucson's plazas and reward money growing to over $100,000 for information leading to the family's discovery. Maria's sister Consuela became the family's public voice, appearing regularly on local and national news programs. "My sister and her family are not just statistics," she said during one emotional interview. "They are beautiful, loving people who deserve to come home. Someone knows something. Please, if you have any information, come forward. We need closure. We need answers." By mid-August, with leads dwindling and resources stretched thin, the daily searches were scaled back. The case remained active, but the initial urgency had given way to the grinding reality of a long-term investigation. Sheriff Blackburn, his face now drawn with fatigue and frustration, promised the Ramirez family would not be forgotten. "We will keep searching," he vowed. "This isn't over until we bring them home." What no one could have predicted was that the case would remain unsolved for the next 17 years, becoming one of Arizona's most infamous unsolved disappearances. The white Suburban and its precious cargo seemed to have been swallowed by the vast, unforgiving desert, leaving behind only questions, theories, and a community haunted by the mystery of what happened on that scorching July evening in 2006. In 2008, 2 years after the Ramirez family vanished, the case file, once commanding urgent attention, was relocated to the Cochise County Sheriff's Department's cold case storage. The thick manila folder, labeled Ramirez Family Disappearance, July 2006, sat untouched as dust collected on its edges. The initial frenzy had faded, replaced by newer emergencies, limited resources, and the grim reality that with each passing month, the chances of finding the family alive diminished. For Consuela Vasquez, Maria's sister, acceptance was impossible. Every year on the anniversary of the disappearance, she organized a vigil in Tucson's Central Plaza, where photographs of Victor, Maria, and Elena stood illuminated by candlelight. The first vigil drew hundreds, family, friends, concerned citizens, and media. By 2010, attendance had dwindled to dozens. By 2015, only a small circle of family members and dedicated supporters remained. Time passes, but our pain doesn't, Consuela told a reporter during the 10th anniversary in 2016. Her once black hair now streaked with silver, she stood resolute beside her niece's smiling portrait. "Somewhere out there is the truth. Somewhere, someone knows what happened to my family." Local media occasionally revisited the story, particularly around anniversaries or when similar cases emerged. The Tucson Sentinel ran a feature on the 10th anniversary titled Desert Mysteries: The Ramirez Family and Arizona's Unsolved Disappearances. The article summarized known facts, reprinted the sketch of Hollister, and noted the primary suspect had never been located. Sheriff Blackburn, who had led the original investigation, retired in 2012. At his farewell ceremony, he mentioned the Ramirez case as his greatest regret. "There are cases that stay with you," he told colleagues, his voice heavy. "Families that deserved answers we couldn't give them. The Ramirez disappearance haunts me still." Raymond Hollister remained a ghost. Occasional tips surfaced, someone resembling him spotted in New Mexico, or working construction in Colorado, but each lead evaporated upon investigation. His Social Security number showed no activity after 2006. No tax returns were filed. His contractor's license expired. It was as if he, too, had been swallowed by the desert. In 2011, after 5 years with no tangible progress, the Ramirez case received a brief revival when America's Most Wanted featured the story. The segment generated dozens of tips, sending investigators scrambling across the Southwest, but yielded nothing substantial. Hollister's trail remained cold. By 2016, the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, most officers who had worked the original case had retired or transferred. The institutional memory faded. New detectives knew the name Ramirez as a notorious cold case, but few had studied the file in depth. The white Suburban, the mysterious man at the diner, the blood evidence in Hollister's truck, these details became footnotes in departmental history rather than active investigative threads. For Consuela, the system's gradual disengagement was unbearable. She became an advocate for missing persons cases throughout Arizona, establishing a small foundation in her sister's name. The Maria Ramirez Foundation worked to keep attention on unsolved disappearances, particularly those involving Hispanic families who sometimes received less media coverage. "My sister is not forgotten," Consuela would say at community events, her voice firm despite her aging frame. "Neither are the others who vanished without a trace. We will keep searching. We will keep asking questions." Her determination inspired Anita Delgado, a young journalist at the Arizona Republic, who in 2017 began researching a long-form piece about the case. Anita was just a high school student when the Ramirez family disappeared, but remembered the pervasive fear it created in Tucson's Latino community. The Ramirez case represents something profound about justice in border communities, Anita wrote in her pitch to editors. A respected Latino family vanishes, there's initial attention, then gradual neglect. I want to explore not just what happened to them, but why cases like theirs fade from public consciousness. Over 6 months, Anita immersed herself in the case. She interviewed Consuela, retired Sheriff Blackburn, former FBI agent Wells, and others connected to the investigation. She pored over public records, court documents, and newspaper archives. What began as a single article evolved into a 5-part series titled Vanished: The Ramirez Family and Arizona's Justice System. The series, published in early 2018, reignited public interest. Anita's meticulous reporting uncovered previously unreported details, including a potential link between Hollister and a series of equipment thefts from construction sites managed by Ramirez's company, suggesting the motive might have been more complex than simple revenge over a lost contract. More significantly, Anita highlighted systemic issues that may have hampered the investigation. She documented how understaffing at rural sheriff's departments affected cold case investigations and how border politics sometimes complicated missing persons cases involving Hispanic families, even American citizens like the Ramirezes. The series won regional journalism awards and prompted the Cochise County Sheriff's Department to publicly recommit to the case. Sheriff Diego Morales, who had taken office in 2016, announced the formation of a new cold case unit and named the Ramirez disappearance as its first priority. These aren't just files gathering dust, Morales stated at a press conference in March 2018. These are families waiting for answers. The Ramirez case has gone unsolved for too long, and it's time we bring fresh eyes and new technology to bear. The cold case unit began with 2 experienced detectives, Lisa Gonzalez and James Kaplan. Gonzalez, a 15-year veteran with family roots in Tucson, remembered the original investigation. Kaplan had transferred from Phoenix, bringing expertise in digital forensics and database mining. Together, they started from scratch, rebuilding the timeline and re-interviewing surviving witnesses. When cases go cold, we don't just need new evidence, Detective Gonzalez explained during a community update. We need new perspectives. Technology advances. Relationships change. Someone who wouldn't talk 12 years ago might be ready to speak now. The detectives re-examined Hollister's abandoned truck, using advanced DNA techniques unavailable in 2006. They confirmed the blood matched Victor Ramirez and found additional trace evidence, a fiber consistent with the upholstery in the Ramirez Suburban and a partial fingerprint on the truck's tailgate that matched Elena. These findings strengthened the case against Hollister but did little to locate him or the missing family. The detectives expanded their search, using facial recognition software to scan driver's license databases nationwide for matches to Hollister's photo. They reviewed border crossing records, prison admissions, and hospital records across the Southwest. In late 2018, they caught a break, albeit a small one. A former cellmate of Hollister's from a 2004 brief incarceration contacted the department after seeing a rebroadcast of Anita's interviews. The man, now living in Texas, recalled Hollister talking about a remote property in the Peninsula Mountains, straddling the Arizona-New Mexico border. He called it his disappearing place, the tipster reported. Said his grandfather had a mining claim up there, that you could hide a tank in those canyons and nobody would find it for 100 years. Detectives Gonzalez and Kaplan coordinated with New Mexico authorities to identify possible locations. The Peninsulas stretched across nearly 100 miles, a rugged wilderness of steep canyons and dense brush, with hundreds of abandoned mining claims dating back to the late 1800s. Records showed a Harold Hollister had indeed registered several claims in the 1940s, but the precise locations were poorly documented. In early 2019, nearly 13 years after the disappearance, search teams began methodically exploring the range. Helicopter surveys with thermal imaging equipment mapped inaccessible areas. Ground teams with cadaver dogs checked abandoned mine shafts in remote cabins. The search was slow, expensive, and physically demanding. Weeks turned into months with no significant findings. Public interest waxed and waned. When search teams were active, local media covered their efforts. During lulls, the case receded from headlines. Consuela, now in her 70s but still fierce in her advocacy, kept pressure on authorities through regular press conferences and community events. "My sister and her family are still out there," she would say, her voice cracking but resolute. "Whether they're in this world or the next, they deserve to be found. They deserve justice." In September 2019, an unexpected development shifted the investigation's direction. A hiker in the Dragoon Mountains, about 40 miles north of where the Ramirez family was last seen, discovered human remains in a remote canyon. The bones, scattered by scavengers and weathered by the elements, were collected by the medical examiner's office for analysis. Initial testing suggested they belonged to an adult male, approximately 30 to 45 years old. Further examination revealed a distinctive dental pattern matching Raymond Hollister's records. DNA confirmation took weeks, but ultimately verified what investigators had begun to suspect: they had found the remains of their prime suspect. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Hollister had died from a gunshot wound to the head, with the heavily corroded remains of a .38 caliber revolver found nearby. The medical examiner classified it as a likely suicide, estimating death occurred within months of the Ramirez disappearance in 2006. Finding Hollister deceased changes our understanding of this case significantly, Sheriff Morales told reporters. If he took his own life shortly after the family's disappearance, he couldn't have been actively hiding all these years. This suggests he may have disposed of the Ramirez family and then, overcome by guilt or fear of capture, ended his own life. The revelation devastated Consuela and other family members who had clung to the hope that Hollister might eventually be captured and forced to reveal what happened to their loved ones. Now that slim hope was extinguished. If Hollister knew where the family was, he had taken that knowledge to his grave. Detectives Gonzalez and Kaplan regrouped. They expanded their search area to include the Dragoon Mountains, particularly the vicinity where Hollister's remains were found. If he had died there, perhaps the Ramirez family, or evidence of what happened to them, might be nearby. In early 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic began affecting operations nationwide, the investigation faced new challenges. Field searches were temporarily suspended. Lab work slowed. The detectives focused on records and digital evidence they could process remotely. They revisited cell phone data from 2006, mapping tower pings from the Ramirez and Hollister phones on the day of the disappearance. The technology for analyzing historical cell data had improved dramatically. Since 2006, what had once been rough approximations of location could now be refined to more precise areas. The detectives discovered that Hollister's phone had connected to towers along Highway 80, following the same route as the Ramirez family, confirming he had indeed pursued them after the diner sighting. More intriguingly, both phones had last connected to a tower that covered a section of the Mule Mountains southeast of Bisbee, an area that had not been the focus of the original search. This digital breadcrumb suggested a potential location that had been overlooked. As pandemic restrictions eased in late 2020, search teams returned to the field with this new information. They concentrated on a 10-square-mile area in the Mule Mountains where the cell signals had last registered. The terrain was challenging: steep slopes, dense vegetation, abandoned mine workings from the copper boom era. "We're looking for a needle in a haystack," Detective Kaplan admitted during a team briefing. "But now at least we know which haystack to search." In January 2021, nearly 15 years after the disappearance, the case took another unexpected turn. A team of geology students from the University of Arizona, conducting fieldwork for their senior thesis, stumbled upon the rusted frame of a large vehicle at the bottom of an abandoned quarry in the Mule Mountains. The students immediately reported the discovery to authorities. Sheriff's deputies secured the site while a specialized recovery team was assembled. The vehicle was partially buried in sediment, its white paint faded to a ghostly gray, but the shape and dimensions matched a Chevy Suburban. The license plate was missing, but the vehicle identification number, though corroded, was eventually recovered and confirmed it was the Ramirez family's missing SUV. The discovery electrified the investigation. News helicopters circled the area as recovery crews worked to extract the vehicle from its resting place. The Suburban had been deliberately concealed, pushed into the quarry and covered with enough rocks and earth to hide it from aerial searches. Only erosion from several monsoon seasons had gradually exposed parts of the frame. "This is a significant breakthrough," Sheriff Morales announced. "Finding the vehicle gives us hope of finding the family and finally bringing them home." Inside the Suburban, forensic teams made grim discoveries. Bullet holes punctured the driver's side window and dashboard. Blood evidence matching both Victor and Maria was found on the seats. Personal belongings, Elena's backpack, Maria's purse, their packed luggage, remained inside, ruling out robbery as a motive. Most disturbingly, additional blood spatter patterns indicated that shots had been fired from outside the vehicle, through the windows, suggesting an ambush rather than a confrontation. Ballistics experts determined the bullet fragments matched the caliber of the revolver found with Hollister's remains. The scene told a terrible story. The family had been attacked in their vehicle, likely killed where they sat, and then the Suburban was disposed of in the remote quarry. The method suggested planning and determination beyond a momentary rage. Hollister had apparently prepared the site in advance, choosing a location where the vehicle could be effectively hidden. But the most pressing question remained unanswered: where were the bodies of the Ramirez family? The quarry and surrounding area were meticulously searched. Ground-penetrating radar scanned for disturbed earth that might indicate burial sites. Cadaver dogs traversed every accessible inch. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no human remains were located. "It's possible Hollister separated the vehicle from the victims," Detective Gonzalez theorized during a case review. "He may have transported the bodies elsewhere before disposing of the Suburban. The blood evidence suggests they were deceased, but we need to find them to give their family closure." Throughout 2021, the search continued with renewed vigor. The discovery of the vehicle had reignited public interest and brought additional resources. Volunteer search teams joined professionals, combing the wilderness around the quarry on weekends. The Maria Ramirez Foundation organized community events to maintain awareness and raise funds for specialized equipment. Consuela, now using a cane but still forceful in her advocacy, spoke at these gatherings with a mixture of grief and hope. "Finding the car means we're closer," she would say. "After 15 years, we have proof that we're on the right path. My sister and her beautiful family deserve to come home, even if it's only to rest properly." In early 2022, another breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source. A former mining engineer contacted the sheriff's department after seeing news coverage of the quarry discovery. The elderly man explained that the area had been part of an extensive copper mining operation in the 1950s and included a network of horizontal tunnels, adits, that weren't on modern maps. "That old quarry was just a surface operation," he explained, spreading yellow diagrams across the detective's desk. "There's a whole system underneath it. We sealed the entrances when the mine closed, but someone who knew what to look for could have reopened them. This new information transformed the search. A specialized mine rescue team was brought in to safely explore the sealed tunnels. Using the engineer's maps, they located an entrance that showed signs of being reopened. The concrete seal had been partially demolished and then crudely repaired to conceal the disturbance. Inside, the tunnels branched in multiple directions, some partially collapsed, others reasonably intact. The search was painstaking and dangerous, with teams testing for hazardous gases in unstable sections before proceeding. In the third week of exploration, in a side chamber nearly 400 feet from the entrance, they made the discovery everyone had both hoped for and dreaded. 3 sets of human remains lay in the darkness, carefully arranged side by side. Unlike Hollister's remains, which had been scattered by animals in the elements, these had been deliberately placed and had remained undisturbed in the protected environment of the tunnel. Personal items: Victor's watch, Maria's wedding ring, Elena's silver necklace with a butterfly pendant, were found with them, silently testifying to their identities even before DNA confirmation. "We have found the Ramirez family," Sheriff Morales announced at a solemn press conference on April 17, 2022. While this is not the outcome we had hoped for in our hearts, it brings a measure of closure to a case that has haunted our community for nearly 16 years. The medical examiner's report confirmed what the bullet holes in the Suburban had suggested. All 3 victims had died from gunshot wounds, likely killed in their vehicle before being transported to the mine. The evidence supported a scenario where Hollister had ambushed the family on a remote stretch of road, murdered them, concealed their bodies in the abandoned mine, and then disposed of their vehicle in the nearby quarry. For Consuela, the confirmation brought a storm of emotions, grief renewed, but also a certain peace. "Now I know," she told. "They're somewhere, still suffering. They've been together all this time. That gives me some comfort." A funeral service was held in Tucson the following month, attended by hundreds. The Ramirez family was finally laid to rest properly, their headstone bearing the inscription "Together in Life, Together in Eternity." The ceremony marked a turning point for a community that had lived with the mystery for so long. The case file, once gathering dust in the cold case room, was updated with final reports and findings. The investigation had officially reached its conclusion, with Hollister confirmed as the perpetrator and his suicide preventing any prosecution. But many in the department felt there were still unanswered questions. Why had Hollister gone to such elaborate lengths? The rejected bid and workplace confrontation seemed insufficient motivation for such a calculated crime. What had transpired between him and Victor Ramirez that escalated to murder? And had Hollister acted alone, or had others helped him conceal the evidence so effectively? As 2022 drew to a close, these questions remained academic rather than investigative. The case was solved in its essential elements: the family had been found, the perpetrator identified. For most, this represented justice served, albeit belatedly and incompletely. Consuela, through the foundation named for her sister, continued advocating for other missing persons cases. 16 years is too long to wait for answers, she would tell audiences. The technology exists, the methods exist, but often the resources and attention don't. We need to do better for these families. The Ramirez case had evolved from a fresh tragedy to a cold case to a cautionary tale about justice delayed. Yet beneath the public narrative of closure, a young detective named Rafael Ortiz found himself increasingly troubled by loose ends in the case file. As 2023 began, he would start pulling at threads that had been overlooked, unknowingly setting in motion the final chapter of the Ramirez family story. Detective Rafael Ortiz sat alone in the cold case room of the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, surrounded by boxes of evidence from the Ramirez investigation. At 32, Ortiz was relatively new to the department, having transferred from Phoenix PD just 18 months earlier. His connection to the case was personal. Elena Ramirez had been his classmate in elementary school before his family moved away from Tucson. When the discovery of the family's remains was announced in 2022, memories of the bright-eyed girl who had once shared her lunch with him came flooding back. "Something's not right," he muttered, spreading crime scene photos across the table. The case was officially closed, the perpetrator identified, the victims laid to rest. Yet discrepancies nagged at him, inconsistencies in the timeline, forensic details that didn't align with the official narrative of a lone killer. Hollister's suicide had provided a convenient endpoint to the investigation. With the primary suspect dead and the victims found, department resources were redirected to active cases. But Ortiz couldn't shake the feeling that they had settled for an incomplete truth. He began reviewing the case after hours, cataloging questions that remained unanswered. Why had Hollister, a skilled tradesman with no history of violent crime, escalated from workplace disputes to triple homicide? The ballistics report indicated the family was killed with precise shots from a distance, not the frenzied attack of someone overcome with rage. And how had Hollister, working alone, managed to transport 3 bodies and conceal a vehicle so effectively that it took 16 years to discover them? In March 2023, Ortiz approached Sheriff Morales with his concerns. "I know the case is closed, sir," he said, standing in the sheriff's doorway, "but there are loose threads here that don't make sense." Morales, nearing retirement and proud of having resolved one of the department's most notorious cold cases, was initially dismissive. Hollister's prints were on the truck. His gun killed them. He knew the mine where they were hidden. "Case closed, detective." Sir, with respect, Ortiz persisted, Hollister's fingerprints were only found on the exterior of the vehicle. None inside, where we'd expect if he drove it to the quarry. The mine entrance was concealed with professional-grade concrete work, not something an electrician would necessarily know how to do. And the cell tower data shows gaps that suggest multiple phones moving in different directions after the abduction point. Morales studied the younger man, noting the earnest intensity in his eyes. After a moment, he sighed. You're suggesting Hollister had accomplices? Or was himself just part of something bigger? Ortiz replied. The financial motive never made sense. A rejected bid worth what, $20,000? That's not murder motivation. The sheriff drummed his fingers on his desk, weighing departmental priorities against the possibility that they had missed something significant. Finally, he nodded. 2 weeks, Ortiz. Look into your theories, but quietly. If there's nothing substantive, we close this for good. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Ortiz began methodically re-examining evidence, starting with Hollister's background. Previous investigators had focused primarily on his connection to Ramirez's landscaping business. Ortiz looked deeper, tracing Hollister's movements in the months before the disappearance. Bank records showed irregular deposits into Hollister's account, sums between $5,000 and $15,000 that couldn't be tied to legitimate contracting work. His phone records revealed repeated calls to numbers that had never been fully investigated. One number in particular caught Ortiz's attention, a prepaid cell phone that had also connected to the same tower as Hollister's phone on the day of the disappearance. Following this lead, Ortiz tracked the prepaid phone's activity pattern. Though the owner had never been identified, the phone had regularly contacted another number belonging to Michael Brennan, a Tucson-based real estate developer. Brennan's name wasn't new to the case file. His company had been the primary contractor on the project where Ramirez and Hollister had clashed. But his potential connection to the disappearance had never been thoroughly explored. Digging deeper, Ortiz discovered that Brennan Development had been under federal investigation in 2006 for suspected ties to money laundering operations connected to cross-border smuggling. The investigation had stalled due to lack of evidence, but the timing aligned with the Ramirez disappearance. More troubling was a connection Ortiz found in Victor Ramirez's business records. 3 months before the disappearance, Ramirez's company had submitted documentation to county officials regarding improper waste disposal at a Brennan Development construction site. The environmental violations could have triggered substantial fines and delayed a major project. This isn't about a rejected bid, Ortiz murmured, connecting lines on his investigation board. Ramirez was a whistleblower. When he presented his findings to Sheriff Morales after the promised 2 weeks, the older man's skepticism had transformed. Reporters, tears streaming down her lined face. Now I can stop wondering if they're out into grave concern. If you're right, detective, we're looking at a conspiracy to silence a witness, not an isolated crime of passion. Permission to expand the investigation, sir? Morales nodded slowly. Granted. But tread carefully. If Brennan is involved, we're dealing with someone with resources and connections. Do this by the book. Ortiz partnered with Detective Lisa Gonzalez, who had worked on the case during its 2019 to 2022 revival. Together, they built a more comprehensive picture of the events surrounding the Ramirez disappearance. The timing was crucial. Victor Ramirez had filed his report about environmental violations in April 2006. By May, Brennan Development was facing potential penalties exceeding $2 million. In June, Hollister had confronted Ramirez at his office, ostensibly about the rejected bid. The family disappeared in July while traveling on a route that would take them near several Brennan Development projects. We need to look at everyone connected to Brennan during that period, Gonzalez suggested. Employees, contractors, security personnel. Reviewing employee records from 2006 yielded another significant connection. Brennan's head of security at the time was James Vargas, a former Border Patrol agent who had been forced to resign under allegations of excessive force. Vargas had reportedly remained in Brennan's employ until 2010, when he moved to Texas. His current whereabouts were unknown. In July 2023, exactly 17 years after the Ramirez family vanished, Ortiz and Gonzalez traveled to El Paso, following leads on Vargas. They located his ex-wife living in a modest apartment complex on the city's east side. Initially reluctant to speak, Maria Vargas eventually relented when the detectives explained they were investigating connections to the Ramirez case rather than her ex-husband directly. James changed after 2006, she said, hands trembling around a coffee mug. He'd always been harsh, but then he became haunted. Drinking heavily. Waking up screaming about the girl in the back seat. I thought it was just his border patrol trauma resurfacing. Ortiz exchanged a glance with Gonzalez. Elena Ramirez had been in the back seat of the Suburban. Did James ever mention working with a man named Hollister? Raymond Hollister? Gonzalez asked gently. Maria Vargas stiffened. Once. When he was drunk. Said poor Ray was the fall guy. I asked what he meant, and he got angry, told me never to repeat that name. Do you know where your ex-husband is now? She shook her head. Last I heard, he was working security for mining operations in Sonora. But that was 3 years ago. We don't speak anymore. The detectives thanked her and left, immediately contacting the sheriff's department to begin locating Vargas through international channels. The pieces were aligning into a disturbing picture: a whistleblower threatening a powerful developer, a security chief with a questionable past, and a contractor who appeared to have been used as a convenient scapegoat. Back in Arizona, they briefed Sheriff Morales and requested additional resources. The case was officially reopened, though kept quiet to avoid alerting potential suspects. The FBI was brought in, particularly interested in the connections to the previously stalled money laundering investigation. In August, Mexican authorities located James Vargas working for a private security firm in Hermosillo. Rather than request immediate arrest and extradition, the investigators decided on surveillance, hoping Vargas might lead them to others involved. For 3 weeks, his movements were monitored, his calls tracked, his contacts identified. Then, unexpectedly, Vargas booked a flight to Phoenix. U.S. authorities were notified, and a plan was quickly developed to intercept him upon arrival. On September 12, 2023, as Vargas exited customs at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, he was met by detectives Ortiz and Gonzalez, accompanied by FBI agents. Mr. Vargas, Ortiz said, showing his badge. We'd like to talk to you about the Ramirez family. The color drained from Vargas's face. Without resistance, he allowed himself to be escorted to a secure room in the airport where initial questioning would begin. For the first hour, Vargas maintained his innocence, claiming no knowledge of the Ramirez disappearance beyond what he had seen in news reports. When presented with his ex-wife's statement about the girl in the back seat, he dismissed it as misinterpreted drunken ramblings. The breakthrough came when Ortiz mentioned Raymond Hollister. Hollister was just following orders, Vargas blurted, then immediately fell silent, realizing his error. Whose orders, James? Gonzalez pressed. Brennan's? After a long pause, Vargas asked for a lawyer. The questioning was suspended, but the damage was done. His inadvertent admission established a connection between Hollister and a larger conspiracy. While Vargas consulted with his attorney, investigators moved quickly to secure search warrants for Michael Brennan's home, offices, and digital records. Executed simultaneously to prevent evidence destruction, the searches yielded crucial documentation, including encrypted communication records from 2006 that, once decrypted, contained explicit references to handling the Ramirez problem. Most damning was an audio recording found in Brennan's home safe. On it, voices identified as Brennan, Vargas, and Hollister discussed plans to intercept the Ramirez family on their trip to Mexico. Brennan could be heard saying, "No loose ends. Make it look like they vanished crossing the border. Everyone will assume cartel involvement." On September 20, 2023, Michael Brennan was arrested at his Tucson office. The 68-year-old developer, once among Arizona's most prominent businessmen, was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling as news of his arrest spread. His lawyer immediately issued a statement denying all allegations, but the evidence was mounting rapidly. Meanwhile, facing potential life imprisonment, Vargas began negotiating through his attorney. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he offered a full confession detailing the conspiracy and his role in it. After extensive consultation with prosecutors, a deal was struck. Vargas's confession, recorded over 2 days, revealed the full horror of what had happened to the Ramirez family. According to his account, Brennan had become increasingly concerned about Victor Ramirez's environmental whistleblowing, which threatened to expose not only violations but potential evidence of money laundering through construction projects. Brennan told me to solve the problem, Vargas stated. He didn't explicitly say to kill them, but the implication was clear. I recruited Hollister because he already had a plausible connection to Ramirez through the contract dispute. The plan was to make it look like Hollister acted alone out of revenge. Hollister had followed the family from the diner, with Vargas in a separate vehicle. They forced the Suburban off the road in a remote area. Victor was shot first, then Maria. Elena, only 16, had begged for her life. Hollister couldn't do it, Vargas admitted, his voice cracking for the first time. During his confession, he was supposed to shoot the girl, but he froze. I did it. That's the scream that haunted me for years. Her face. I still see her face. The bodies were transported to the abandoned mine, which Vargas knew about from his border patrol days when it had been used by smugglers. The Suburban was concealed in the nearby quarry. Afterward, according to Vargas, Brennan paid them each $50,000. Hollister couldn't live with it, Vargas continued. He started drinking heavily, talking about turning himself in. Brennan couldn't risk it, so he ordered me to handle Hollister too. Vargas described tracking Hollister to the Dragoon Mountains and shooting him with the same weapon used on the Ramirez family. He positioned the gun to make it appear a suicide, ensuring the case would effectively close if Hollister's body was ever found. I thought it was over, Vargas concluded. But it was never over. Not really. The confession sent shockwaves through Arizona's law enforcement and business communities. Michael Brennan, the respected philanthropist and developer, had orchestrated a triple homicide to protect his criminal enterprises. The case that had haunted the region for 17 years was finally exposed in all its calculated brutality. In October 2023, the Cochise County Sheriff's Department held a press conference announcing charges against both Brennan and Vargas. Sheriff Morales, flanked by Detectives Ortiz and Gonzalez, addressed a packed room of journalists and community members. Today marks a significant milestone in our pursuit of justice for Victor, Maria, and Elena Ramirez, Morales stated. What we once believed was the work of a single individual driven by personal grievance has been revealed as a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of our business community. No one, regardless of wealth or influence, is above the law. Consuela Vasquez, now 80 and requiring wheelchair assistance, attended the press conference. When given an opportunity to speak, she addressed the room with quiet dignity. For 17 years, I prayed for truth, she said, her voice frail but unwavering. I thought finding my family would bring closure. But true justice means knowing why they were taken, who was responsible, and seeing them answer for their crimes. Today, I can finally tell my sister that her killers will face judgment. The case against Brennan and Vargas proceeded rapidly. With Vargas's testimony and the substantial physical evidence, prosecutors were confident of convictions. Additional charges related to money laundering and obstruction of justice were added as the financial investigation expanded. In January 2024, Vargas pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder as part of his cooperation agreement. He was sentenced to 25 years without possibility of parole. At his sentencing, he turned to face Consuela directly. I know no apology can undo what I've done, he said, eyes downcast. Your family deserve to live. Not a day passes that I don't regret my actions. I can only hope that my confession brings you some measure of peace. Consuela's response was measured but pointed, God may forgive you. I am still working on it. Brennan's trial began in March 2024, becoming one of Arizona's most high-profile criminal cases in decades. His defense team attempted to portray Vargas as an unreliable witness acting on his own initiative, but the documentary evidence, particularly the audio recording, proved damning. The prosecution presented a methodical case detailing how Brennan had used his construction empire to launder money for cross-border criminal enterprises, how Victor Ramirez's environmental complaints threatened to expose these operations, and how Brennan had orchestrated the family's murder to protect himself. After 6 weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Michael Brennan, once celebrated in Arizona business circles, was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As Brennan was led from the courtroom, Detective Ortiz watched silently, thinking of the classmate he had barely remembered until this case reopened old wounds. Elena Ramirez would have been 34 now, perhaps with a career in architecture as she had dreamed, perhaps with a family of her own. All possibilities erased by greed and callousness. In the aftermath of the trial, the ripples extended far beyond the courtroom. The FBI's investigation into Brennan's financial operations led to additional arrests, exposing corruption that had festered in the region for decades. Construction projects were scrutinized, environmental violations addressed, and regulatory oversight strengthened. The case transformed how law enforcement approached cold cases throughout the Southwest. The Cochise County Sheriff's Department established a permanent cold case unit, with Detective Ortiz appointed as its first supervisor. His methodical approach to the Ramirez investigation became a model for reviewing long-dormant files with fresh perspectives. On July 14, 2024, the 18th anniversary of the disappearance, a memorial garden was dedicated at Tucson High School, where Maria had taught and Elena had been a student. A simple stone marker bore their names, along with Victor's, and the inscription, "Truth delayed is not truth denied." Consuela, who had spent nearly 2 decades advocating tirelessly for her family, attended the dedication ceremony. Afterward, she met privately with the investigative team that had finally uncovered the full truth. "My sister was a teacher," she told them, clasping each of their hands in turn. "She believed knowledge was sacred, that truth matters above all else. You have honored her belief. You have shown that persistence and integrity eventually overcome even the most powerful forces of corruption." To Detective Ortiz, she added, "You saw what others missed because you remembered Elena as a person, not just a victim. Never lose that humanity in your work." The Maria Ramirez Foundation evolved from its origins as a missing persons advocacy organization to focus more broadly on corporate accountability and environmental whistleblower protection. Consuela, despite her advanced age, remained its guiding spirit, speaking at universities and community organizations about the importance of persistence in seeking justice. "The powerful count on our forgetting," she would tell audiences. "They count on time erasing their crimes. But memory is a form of resistance. Remembering is an act of justice." In December 2024, as the case officially closed with the exhaustion of all appeals, Sheriff Morales, now retired, reflected on the investigation's legacy during a year-end interview. "The Ramirez case teaches us that justice doesn't have an expiration date," he said. "It reminds us why we do this work, not just to solve crimes, but to ensure that no victim is forgotten, no perpetrator escapes accountability, no matter their wealth or influence." For the communities along the Arizona-Mexico border, the case represented something profound, a recognition that every life matters equally, that the disappearance of a Latino family deserved the same relentless pursuit of justice as any other victims. The resolution, though decades delayed. Ties to Brennan's old network had been forced to cease operations, their assets seized under expanded RICO statutes. For many in the Latino community, these changes represented a long overdue recognition of concerns they had raised for decades. Organizations like the Border Justice Coalition, which had supported Consuela Vasquez throughout her quest for answers, now partnered with law enforcement and community outreach programs designed to build trust and encourage reporting of suspicious activities. Before the Ramirez case resolution, many in our community viewed police with suspicion, explained Coalition Director Gabriela Fuentes. There was a perception that crimes against Latino families weren't investigated with the same vigor. That perception has begun to change, not completely, but meaningfully. This evolving relationship was evident in the increased reporting of missing persons cases along the border. Families who might previously have hesitated to engage with authorities now came forward, encouraged by the example of persistence and eventual justice in the Ramirez case. Perhaps the most profound transformation occurred in the realm of public memory. What began as Consuela's solitary vigils had evolved into an annual community remembrance, held each July 14th at the Memorial Garden outside Tucson High School. The event now honored not only the Ramirez family but all victims of unsolved crimes, symbolizing a collective commitment that no case would be forgotten. In July 2025, nearly 19 years after the disappearance, the remembrance drew its largest attendance yet. People from across Arizona gathered in the garden, where the desert plants selected by Maria's former students flourished around the memorial stone. Battery-powered candles flickered in the twilight, creating a field of light that stretched across the school grounds. Consuela, now in her 80s and increasingly frail, was wheeled to the center of the gathering by Miguel. Despite her physical limitations, her voice carried clearly as she addressed the crowd. "When my family disappeared, I stood alone with my candle for many years," she said, surveying the hundreds of lights surrounding her. "I never imagined this, that their memory would bring together an entire community, that their story would change how we seek justice." She gestured to the diverse group before her, families of other victims, law enforcement officers, students, activists, journalists, united in common purpose despite backgrounds that might otherwise have separated them. "This is their legacy," she continued. "Not just that the men who took them were punished, but that we learned to stand together against those who would abuse power, to protect the vulnerable, to insist that every life matters equally under the law." Among those listening was Detective Ortiz, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Now approaching 40, he had risen to head the dormant case unit, his work on the Ramirez investigation having established him as a leading expert in reviving stalled cases. Yet he remained humble about his role, consistently redirecting credit to Consuela's persistence and the collaborative efforts of countless individuals over nearly 2 decades. After the ceremony, he approached Consuela, kneeling beside her wheelchair to speak at eye level. "I bring news," he said softly. "The FBI has completed the financial investigation. They've traced Brennan's money all the way back to its sources, dismantled the entire laundering network. 6 more arrests this week." Consuela nodded, grasping his hand. "The ripples continue to spread." "They do," he agreed. "And we've applied the techniques from your family's case to reopen 27 dormant investigations from the past 3 decades. For have already yielded new evidence." A gentle smile crossed her lined face. "My sister would be proud. She always believed education was the most powerful force for change. Now her story teaches justice." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Senator Marcos Diaz, recently elected to represent Arizona in Washington. The young legislator had campaigned on reforms inspired partly by the Ramirez case, advocating for increased federal resources for dormant investigations and stronger protections for environmental whistleblowers. "Mrs. Vasquez," he greeted Consuela with deep respect. "I wanted you to know that the Senate Judiciary Committee has approved the Victor Ramirez Whistleblower Protection Act. It should come to a full vote next month." "Will it pass?" she asked directly. "It has bipartisan support," the senator replied. "Your family's story transcended political divisions. Nobody wants to stand against justice that has been so clearly illustrated." Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed and the garden grew quiet, Miguel Ramirez remained by the memorial stone with his young daughter, Sofia, named for his Aunt Maria's middle name. At 6 years old, Sofia was too young to understand the full complexity of her family's history, but Miguel had begun sharing age-appropriate versions of their story. "Abuelito Victor was very brave," he explained, touching the engraved name on the stone. "He saw something wrong and spoke up about it, even though powerful people wanted him to stay quiet." Sofia considered this solemnly. "Was he scared?" "Probably," Miguel acknowledged. "Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means doing what's right even when you're afraid. Is that why you're becoming a lawyer? To be brave like him?" Miguel smiled at his daughter's perception. Partly. But also because I want to help create a world where being brave doesn't cost people their lives. Where the truth is protected, not punished. The conversation captured the essence of how the Ramirez legacy had evolved. Beyond the specifics of the case, beyond even the reforms it had inspired, was this fundamental shift in understanding that justice required not just legal processes but a community committed to protecting truth-tellers, to valuing transparency over power, to ensuring that no voice could be silently extinguished. This understanding extended to educational institutions throughout Arizona. The University of Tucson's Environmental Science Department had established the Victor Ramirez Ethics Fellowship, supporting students focusing on corporate accountability and regulatory compliance. High schools incorporated the case into civics curricula, emphasizing citizens' roles in maintaining just communities. Media coverage of the case's ongoing impact remained substantial. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and authors continued exploring different aspects of the story. Some focused on the investigation itself, others on the broader implications for border justice, corporate oversight, or the evolution of forensic techniques. In September 2025, the Arizona Republic published a comprehensive retrospective titled Beyond Brennan: The Expanding Legacy of the Ramirez Case. The feature documented how the investigation had led to the unraveling of multiple criminal enterprises beyond those directly involved in the murders. What began as the search for a single family has exposed a shadow network of corruption spanning decades, journalist Thomas Reynolds wrote. Reinforced faith in institutions that had sometimes seemed indifferent to their concerns. Detective Rafael Ortiz continued leading the cold case unit, approaching each file with the same careful attention that had broken open the Ramirez investigation. On his office wall hung a simple framed photograph, his elementary school class picture, with Elena Ramirez smiling in the front row, a reminder of why the work mattered. When asked by a rookie deputy why he devoted so much energy to cases others considered hopeless, Ortiz would point to the photo. Because time doesn't diminish the truth, he would say. And everyone deserves someone who remembers them, who refuses to let their story end in darkness. In Tucson's Evergreen Cemetery, where the Ramirez family finally rested together, fresh flowers appeared regularly, left by family members, friends, and sometimes by strangers who had been moved by their story. Their grave had become a quiet symbol of persistence, of truth eventually emerging from shadow, of justice that may arrive late but arrives nonetheless. And in the hearts of those who had known them, and those who had come to know them through the long journey toward justice, the Ramirez family lived on, not defined by the tragedy that took them, but by the love they had shared, the communities they had touched, and the profound change their case had ultimately created in a system that had initially failed them. Their legacy was this: that no power, no influence, no amount of time could permanently obscure the truth when even a single person refused to stop searching for it. The impact of the Ramirez case extended far beyond the courtroom resolution. In April 2025, nearly 19 years after the family's disappearance, its influence continued to ripple through Arizona's legal system, law enforcement agencies, and border communities. The case had transformed from a tragedy into a catalyst for systemic change, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted when the white Suburban vanished into the desert night. At the University of Arizona Law School, a new course titled Cold Case Prosecution, Ethics and Methodology used the Ramirez investigation as its central case study. Professor Alicia Mendez, a former prosecutor who had consulted on the Brennan trial, guided students through the complex interplay of forensic science, investigative persistence, and legal strategy that had finally brought justice. The Ramirez case teaches us that justice is never truly cold, Professor Mendez told her students during the inaugural lecture. It may hibernate, waiting for technology to advance, for witnesses to find courage, for investigators to see patterns others missed. But given the right conditions, it awakens. Among her students sat Miguel Ramirez, Victor's nephew, now pursuing a career in law inspired by his family's story. For Miguel, the classroom discussions were deeply personal, each legal principle illuminated by the memory of an uncle he had barely known but whose legacy now defined his path. My family's tragedy showed me how law can be both weapon and shield, Miguel explained during a small group discussion. It was wielded against them by powerful interests, but ultimately, it was also the tool that held those same powers accountable. Across campus in the School of Journalism, Anita Delgado, whose investigative series had helped revive the case in 2018, now taught advanced reporting courses. Her students' final project involved researching other dormant cases that might benefit from renewed attention, applying the techniques that had proven so effective in the Ramirez investigation. Journalism isn't just about reporting facts, Anita emphasized. It's about preventing powerful narratives from being buried. The Ramirez family might have remained a footnote in history, the family that vanished, if not for persistent questioning of the official story. Her philosophy was producing results. Two of her former students had recently published investigations that prompted authorities to reopen long-dormant cases, one involving disappeared Indigenous women along border highways, another examining suspicious deaths linked to corporate environmental violations similar to those Victor Ramirez had reported. In the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, the cold case unit established after the Ramirez breakthrough had expanded. What began as Detective Rafael Ortiz working alone now comprised a team of 4 detectives, a forensic technician, and a data analyst, occupying a dedicated office space where case files were treated not as history but as ongoing investigations. The unit's walls displayed a timeline of the Ramirez case, not as a trophy of past success, but as a methodological template. Each step in the investigation, from Ortiz's initial questioning of the official narrative to the final arrest of Michael Brennan, was analyzed for lessons that could apply to other unsolved cases. "We don't use the term cold anymore," Ortiz explained to a group of visiting detectives from neighboring counties. "We call them dormant investigations. Cold implies lifeless, finished. Dormant suggests potential for revival under the right conditions." This semantic shift reflected a deeper change in investigative philosophy spreading throughout the region. Cases once considered hopeless were being methodically re-examined. Digital archives made old evidence more accessible. Advanced forensic techniques extracted information from samples that had previously yielded nothing. Most importantly, investigators approached dormant files with renewed determination, conscious that the passage of time was not an insurmountable obstacle. In May 2025, this approach yielded another significant breakthrough. A 1998 disappearance of a young couple near Tombstone, long attributed to a random act of violence by unknown assailants, was linked through DNA evidence to an associate of Michael Brennan. The connection suggested a pattern of eliminating witnesses to illicit activities that predated the Ramirez murders by nearly a decade. The Ramirez case didn't just solve one crime, Sheriff Elena Martinez, who had succeeded Morales, told reporters. It opened a door to understanding a broader criminal ecosystem that operated in our region for decades. Each new connection we uncover helps dismantle what remains of that system. The case's influence extended beyond law enforcement to regulatory agencies. Arizona's Department of Environmental Quality had significantly strengthened its whistleblower protections, implementing a system that allowed anonymous reporting of violations while ensuring allegations were thoroughly investigated regardless of the economic influence of the parties involved. This reform stemmed directly from the recognition that Victor Ramirez's environmental concerns had been initially dismissed by regulatory officials hesitant to challenge a powerful developer. The new protocols were known informally as Ramirez rules, acknowledging the tragic consequences of the previous system's failures. Corporate accountability had increased as well. Construction and development companies operating near the border faced heightened scrutiny, with financial audits and environmental compliance reviews conducted by teams that included both state and federal authorities. Several firms with the Ramirez investigation didn't just close one case, it created a template for unmasking systemic criminality that hides behind legitimate business facades. The article detailed how techniques pioneered during the later stages of the Ramirez investigation had been adapted to examine cold cases throughout the Southwest. Financial forensics, originally used to track Brennan's illicit activities, now helped identify patterns in other unsolved crimes, revealing connections previously hidden beneath seemingly isolated incidents. Law enforcement agencies from neighboring states increasingly sent officers to train with Ortiz's unit, learning to apply his methodologies to their own dormant cases. This cross-pollination of investigative techniques created an informal network of specialists dedicated to ensuring that the passage of time no longer guaranteed immunity for the powerful. In October, this network achieved another significant breakthrough. A series of disappearances along Interstate 10 in New Mexico between 1999 and 2004, long thought to be the work of a serial predator, was linked through financial evidence to associates of Brennan's smuggling operation. What had been misinterpreted as random violence was revealed as a systematic elimination of potential witnesses. "We're seeing a paradigm shift," Detective Ortiz explained during a regional law enforcement conference in Albuquerque. Cases once analyzed purely from a behavioral perspective are being reconsidered through the lens of structural criminality. We're asking not just who had the psychological profile of a killer, but who stood to gain financially or politically from these deaths. This perspective yielded results across jurisdictional boundaries. Cold cases in Texas, New Mexico, and California were reopened based on potential connections to the criminal networks exposed by the Ramirez investigation. The FBI established a specialized unit focused exclusively on these interconnected border region cases, with agents trained in both traditional investigative techniques and sophisticated financial forensics. By December 2025, the ripple effects had reached Washington. Congressional hearings on border security now included substantial focus on corporate complicity in cross-border crime, moving beyond the traditional emphasis on undocumented immigration and drug trafficking to examine how legitimate businesses facilitated money laundering and other illicit activities. Expert witnesses frequently cited the Ramirez case as the inflection point that had revealed the extent of this corporate criminal nexus. Regulatory agencies presented evidence of how environmental violations often served as indicators of deeper criminal involvement, echoing Victor Ramirez's tragically prescient concerns. These developments were closely followed by Consuela Vasquez from her modest Tucson home, now a de facto headquarters for the Maria Ramirez Foundation. Though her health was declining, her mind remained sharp, her commitment to justice undiminished. She maintained regular communication with Detective Ortiz, Senator Diaz, and others working to extend her family's legacy. "I never wanted to be an activist," she confided to Miguel during a quiet family dinner. "I only wanted my sister back. But when that became impossible, I discovered that purpose can grow from pain. That meaning can emerge from tragedy if we refuse to surrender to despair." This philosophy guided the Foundation's expanding work. What began as advocacy for a single family had evolved into a multifaceted organization supporting victims' families, promoting investigative journalism, and advancing policy reforms. Its annual scholarship program enabled students from border communities to pursue careers in law, journalism, environmental science, and criminal justice. On Christmas Eve 2025, Consuela received an unexpected visitor. Former Sheriff Thomas Blackburn, now in his 80s and rarely seen in public, arrived at her home carrying a small gift box. "I've wanted to do this for years," he explained, settling heavily into a chair across from her. "But shame kept me away. I failed your family, Consuela. In those early days, I didn't push hard enough, didn't see what should have been obvious." Consuela regarded him thoughtfully. "You were working within a system that wasn't designed to see certain truths." "That's no excuse," he replied. "But watching how the case has transformed that system, watching you transform it through sheer force of will, has given this old man some peace." He handed her the box. Inside lay his sheriff's badge, mounted on a simple wooden plaque with an inscription, "To Consuela Vasquez, who taught us that justice has no time limit." "I couldn't save your family," Blackburn said quietly. "But you saved countless others by refusing to let their case die. You changed how we understand justice in this region." The moment epitomized the reconciliation occurring throughout Arizona's legal system, an acknowledgement of past failures coupled with a commitment to a more equitable future. This process wasn't without friction. Entrenched interests resisted greater accountability, and some viewed the focus on corporate crime as politically motivated. But the tangible results, cases solved, criminals prosecuted, vulnerable communities better protected, gradually overcame such resistance. As 2026 approached, marking the 20th anniversary of the Ramirez family's disappearance, preparations began for a commemorative event unlike the somber vigils of earlier years. The planned gathering would celebrate not just the resolution of one case but the transformation of an entire approach to justice, a transformation born from one woman's refusal to let her family be forgotten. The Maria Ramirez Foundation commissioned a documentary titled 20 Years of Truth, chronicling the case's evolution from tragedy to catalyst for change. The film featured interviews with key figures: Consuela, Detective Ortiz, former Sheriff Blackburn, journalists who had covered the case, and families of other victims who had found renewed hope in its resolution. The Ramirez story reminds us that justice is not just an outcome but a process, narrator James Earl Jones intoned over the film's closing sequence. A process that requires vigilance, courage, and the unwavering belief that truth cannot remain buried forever. This sentiment captured what had become the enduring lesson of the case, that justice delayed need not be justice denied, that systems can change when challenged persistently enough, that even the most powerful cannot forever escape accountability when communities unite in demanding truth. For those who had lived through the case's long journey, from the disappearance in 2006 to the final revelations nearly 2 decades later, this understanding transformed a narrative of loss into one of legacy. The Ramirez family had been taken by violence born of greed and corruption, but their absence had ultimately strengthened the very systems of justice they had been denied. "Sometimes I think about what might have been," Miguel reflected as the anniversary approached. "The lives they would have lived, the contributions they would have made. But then I look at what their absence created, this movement, these changes." This determination that no family should ever be forgotten again, and I know they continue to shape our world. This was the paradox at the heart of the Ramirez story, that a tragedy born of injustice had become a powerful force for justice itself. Not as consolation for what was lost, nothing could compensate for those 3 lives cut short, but as testimony that even the darkest chapter could contain seeds of transformation if nurtured by sufficient courage and persistence. As Detective Rafael Ortiz prepared the Dormant Case Unit's annual report in January 2026, he included a quote from Elena Ramirez's high school journal, recovered from her bedroom during the original investigation: "I believe the most important thing is to leave the world better than you found it. Even if you can only change one small corner, that change ripples outward in ways you might never see." The teenager could not have known how prophetic her words would prove, nor how her family's story would ultimately create ripples that transformed an entire region's approach to justice. But as her case continued to inspire investigators, activists, legislators, and ordinary citizens nearly 20 years after her disappearance, Elena's simple wisdom had become reality. In that reality lay the final lesson of the Ramirez case, that justice, at its core, is not merely about punishing wrongdoing but about creating communities where truth is valued above power, where every life matters equally, where persistence in the face of seemingly impossible odds can eventually bend the arc of history toward fairness and accountability. This was the legacy that would endure long after the specific details of the case faded from public memory, a testament to the enduring power of a single family's story to change the world, one ripple at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.